I also have to make sure that's peppered throughout my week, because that's what gives me energy. So if I've had a week where I don't get to interact with clients or humans or do these fun interviews with people like you, I feel very depleted. Like, I like to do this stuff. I love talking with individuals. I love getting to know people and having conversations. And so that's another part that I always make sure that's in place to make sure I feel fueled. Because that's really like, that's what fills my cup, and that's what allows me to be both analytical and creative. So like, it's really, for me, comes down to like the human connection. So that's another important piece. So yeah, I guess my advice would be that, like, honor the way your brain works and give yourself time to like dedicate. I mean, you might not be able to do it perfectly, but like really carve out some time to dedicate, when your brain has to think in one direction, and then allow your brain to think in another direction, because it is so hard to flip flop a lot of time.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of the peopleHum interview series. This is your host Neha at peopleHum. peopleHum is an end-to-end, one-view, integrated human capital management automation platform, the winner of the 2019 Global Cody Award for HCM, that's specifically built for crafted employee experiences and the future of work. We run the peopleHum blogging channel that receives more than 200,000 visitors a year, and we also publish several interviews with well-known names globally every month. In today's episode, we have with us Allie LeFevere. Allie is the co-founder and creative director of Obedient, a humor branding and marketing agency. Aside from this, she's a business and comedy podcast host, and she's featured in BuzzFeed, New York Magazine, Vice, and Esquire. She has spent the last 10 years creating, launching, and scaling fun-centric global programs for brands and entrepreneurs, whipping up their humorous branding, marketing campaigns, and just making sure that every touch point of their customers' experience is unforgettable, unconventional, and very importantly, unboring. Before starting her own humor branding agency named Obedient, she was the VP of engagement at a Chicago-based startup, post which she went on to running her first full-time business in 2014. She has developed innovative programming for big names like Dell, AT&T, Trunk Club, and she has also individually catered to 9,000 plus people. So Allie, once again, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here with us today.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be here. This is such a lovely, warm intro. So thank you.
Okay, so Allie, the first question that I want to ask you is that your company Obedient, a humor branding firm, sounds very interesting. And I can't wait to hear all about it. So please tell us how you came to decide that, this is something that you want to do. So was it your love for humor, or was it any specific life incident that led you to it? Or was it just your natural inclination?
So I love that question, because it's always so fun to talk about the origin of how we even came to develop this agency built around the idea. So the whole premise is that fun sells. And so, I mean, firstly, I grew up in a really funny family where comedy and humor and fun was just a centerpiece to how we communicate, how we engage with each other, the entertainment we consume, and how just a big piece of how we, enjoy our everyday. So I've always been a huge fan of comedy. And I think it's such a powerful tool to humanize and to empathize and to clarify. And I just think it's it's one of the most wonderful gifts that you can, put out into the world, is like the power to make someone smile and laugh. So I've always been a big believer of that. And I was in the branding and marketing space, per this wonderful intro you gave me, for a very long time. And what I was finding is, whenever I was developing like a brand strategy for a client, or I was writing copy, or I was developing like their identity or brand's personality, I found that the style I personally preferred and I thought was the most effective was using some form of fun or humor or levity. And so when I would write and I would create and I would, again, develop this branding, that was always the direction I would take, is like some variation of that. Maybe it was more clever. Maybe it was more silly. Maybe it was bold and direct, but it all fell under that umbrella, because what I started to see is that so many other businesses out there either don't use any personality in their branding at all. And so it's like, it's boring and it's forgettable and it's not memorable. Or a very effective strategy, but one I didn't like, was using fear to drive business. And so that, what I mean by fear is preying on people's pain points or their insecurities or their perceived inadequacies, and really honing in on the worst parts of someone and digging into that and making that the reason they convert and buy your products and services. And so very effective tool. It works, but it just wasn't what I wanted to be a part of. And so I was using this other thing, humor, and found it to be just really effective. And so my business partner and I started this agency because she was a comedy writer and a copywriter. And I was obviously doing branding and copywriting. And we thought we were both using humor and we're both using levity and found it really effective. So we said, well, instead of doing boring and forgettable, or instead of doing fear-based marketing, why don't we build an entire agency around this idea that fun sells? And, this is our opportunity to still do branding and marketing, but also put more joy and laughter and humanity out into the world. Because when you can make a consumer smile or feel good or feel delighted or feel surprised or feel energized, like that does more than get them to pay attention to your product. That actually starts to build a relationship. And so
Absolutely.
they're more likely to be endeared to you and with you long term if you can draw out the best in who they are and make them feel good as they interact with your product or service. So yeah, that was kind of the whole premise of how we built this agency. So okay, awesome.
Based on what you just said, I feel like there are many ways to connect to your audience, right? Like you said, there are many people who build on fear to do that. But then once you connect with them based on humor, not only is it going to like help you in the long term, give you that inner satisfaction that what I'm doing, I'm doing something really good here. But I mean, even from like a third party's perspective, usually when you put that kind of an image to something that goes into branding, people tend to remember it for a longer period of time. So I mean, that's just as a third party perspective that I just wanted to put it out there. So I feel like what you're doing is really great. It's absolutely inspiring.
Oh, that makes me, it like warms my heart because, I think especially now we're in a really tough time in just the world.
Yes,
and I think that there's something really beautiful about being able to make people smile and laugh. And I know it's still branding and marketing. I know I'm still ultimately helping people sell a product, but I do think we engage with brands all day long, every day. We engage with advertising and marketing messages, hundreds, if not thousands a day. And so like how cool that you can make people feel good and make them smile and make them like it lighten their day a little bit. And so I think that there's a real opportunity to not just change the conversation you're having with your consumers, but like change the landscape of marketing and branding in general.
I can imagine the kind of satisfaction that you'd probably be deriving from that, knowing, somewhere at the back of your mind that the work that you're doing is just spreading smiles all around. And how wonderful is that? I mean, honestly, that's really amazing, Allie.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, I decided, many years ago that I want to laugh for a living. I want to laugh and create, and that's the legacy I want to leave in the world. And so it's been really fun to be able to execute part of that through the agency.
Absolutely. Moving on to the second question. So, Allie, I feel like you have an eye for the extraordinary. Because like you just mentioned, that because in today's world where brands are competing to stand out, I can imagine that coming up with unique ways to put one's brand forward must be a very daunting task. So my question to you is, how do you usually go about that process?
Yeah, so we have a very robust process that we take folks through. And so ultimately what we're trying to do is the end thing we're trying to create is a brand personality. So like that's what we call our whole process, is the process of creating a brand personality. And what I mean by that is the way your brand interacts and engages with the world, both visually and verbally. So we think of brand personalities the same way we think of people's personalities. Like every person's personality makes the person they're engaging with feel a certain way. So when we are developing a brand's personality, what we're doing is we want to deeply understand their audience, and not just the demographics of their audience. We want to understand the emotional state of their audience's psyche. So and we have a very robust intake process to get to these answers, but
Mm-hmm.
But, what do they care about? What is meaningful for them? What are they afraid of? What are they sick of hearing about? What keeps them up at night? Like, how do they spend their weekends? What are their aspirations? Like, we really want to understand the emotional state of the audience so that we can create content and creative that resonates with them. And so we're also looking at things like, obviously the audience is like the centerpiece for us, but also what is their industry's landscape look like? What are their other competitors doing? Because as we are trying to create a brand's personality and both the
Yes,
voice and the
yes,
visual experience,
absolutely.
we're trying to distinguish it from anything else out there, and really make sure it says something different and it says something unique. And then we layer on a personality, like we layer on tones and and tactics and things like that, so we can bring that to life, so that we can give it its own voice, give it its own personality, make it shine differently than other people in their industry. And so, every tone of humor we use elicits a different response. So being very bold and direct elicits a different response from your audience than being very silly and playful, or being very clever and witty has a very different audience reaction than being maybe dry and a bit sarcastic, right? So they
Mm-hmm.
all make you feel something different, and depending on what your service is and what your industry looks like and what your audience needs are, we tailor that so that it again resonates with the right individuals. But it's I think it's weirdly less challenging in notoriously very boring or dry industries, because they're generally the
I
first
can
people adding
imagine.
personality there.
Yes, yes.
um and so it can be a little bit more tricky in industries that maybe have had more fun, maybe like skincare or
Hmm.
fashion. Like, there's some industries that are starting to use some of that. But, when we're developing all the creative, we always think if it's our first idea, then that means it's the first idea that other people would have come up with too. So we really try to dig in and try to think of something that no one else has thought of. They've never said it this way. And so that's always like a really fun process. Like, we get to just be silly and ridiculous and ideate, and yeah, it's
Yes,
great.
yes. So a week from marketing myself, I do fully relate to what you just spoke about, personas, and how it's how you just give your brand an identity. And at the same time, I just want to mention this, that when people think about branding, they don't usually, I mean, when you look at the final output of how a particular product or a particular service is branded, it's very easy to jump to the conclusion that this is just all creativity. This is
Mhm.
all just creativity. But at the end of the day, I feel like from everything that you spoke right now, it's pretty evident that a lot of logical thinking also goes into that, and it's actually a really tough job. It's much, I believe it's much tougher than it seems, because like you said, trying to come up with something unique for every single brand, and not just in terms of what the brand is about, but also in terms of whether that has ever been implemented anywhere before with similar
Mhm.
brands, trying to think of, and there are so many brands out there, so many brands out there. So I can
Yeah.
imagine how difficult that must be. So, although this sounds very, very interesting, I'm sure this must be very challenging as well. And what you're doing is truly commendable.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Well, I think another piece of, yeah, I would say all of our creativity is very intentional and very thoughtful and very
Hmm.
strategic, right? Because I
Hmm.
think a problem that people often, or a mistake people make when they're trying to apply maybe
Yeah.
humor to their brand, or just like some creativity or personality in general,
Hmm. Hmm.
is
Hmm.
that they're throwing jokes at their brand, and not everything works for every brand. Like, it
Yes.
has to be cohesive, it has to be consistent, it has to be in a similar tone of voice. um because I think that's when you see it not work, in which it doesn't feel aligned. Like, again, think of a person, right? And I think what we really like about people, and when we really start to trust people, is when we get the same version of them every time, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
that's what starts to build like trust, and you relax into a relationship, is because I know who I'm going to get. And there's something really delightful about that. So if you meet someone and they have a different personality every single time you interact with them, you start to back off. It
Yes.
becomes uncomfortable. Like, I don't understand them. I don't get them. I feel a little fearful because I don't know what version I'm going to get. And so you don't really get to build that relationship. So that's why
Absolutely.
creativity doesn't just have to be unique. It has to also be consistent and cohesive and very intentional. And I think that's what makes it work really well. Like, when you see it done well, they've done those things.
Absolutely. I feel like that's a very fresh perspective on creativity, that, it has to be consistent. So I'm sure that's something that's going to stay with me, because it's a very different concept that I've come across.
Great.
So from your words, I can sense that you're a very, very determined businesswoman. So what were some life events that taught you how to be optimistic and believe in yourself in order to scale the heights that you have scaled today?
Yeah, I think that's such a beautiful question, because it's always so neat to look back in your life and go, what's the thing that led me here? I think there's been a few through lines in my life. And I think, humor has always been a source of comfort for me. So in any moment in my life that I've had some hardship, not to get too heavy, but like, I lost my father and I lost my grandfather, and I ended a big relationship all within a few months. And that was, a really tough year for me in my life personally. And what helped me get through that, one of the big things was being able to laugh and smile and like draw out the light elements of that, and be able to focus on the positive, and be able to like see truth. And I think comedy and humor, like I think what comedy is so powerful is that what makes something funny is when it's truthful. And so I think comedy and humor and fun and levity have allowed me to explore deep truths in my own life and like the world around me. It's allowed me to have honest conversations in relationships. It's allowed me to have a stronger marriage. It's allowed me to navigate like hard moments like that. And so I think that is just a principle that I always lean back into, is like, how do I take this challenging moment or this confusing moment, there's difficult moment, and how do I apply like lightness to it? Because when you apply some lightness to it, it doesn't mean you don't take it seriously. It just means it like elevates the opportunity to like see things differently. And so I really think that's always been in me kind of my whole life. If I think back to when I was like in junior high and high school, I used to write parody songs. So I used to like take songs on the radio, and I used to change all the lyrics to something like really funny. Like, I'd write them for my friends. And so I was on student council, and I used to like create a lot of the posters and the marketing graphics and come up with funny, silly things. So I think I've always kind of liked that stuff. But when I went into college, I went into psychology because, I'm so interested in the way people think and the way people respond to things and the way people react and what resonates. And so I think what kind of, I kind of went through a few different career paths in my life, but what I think converted is my love of humor and my love of people. And those things kind of merge perfectly into this agency. And I also get to do it with my best friend. So my business partner is my best friend. Yeah. So we've been best friends for a long time, and we both kind of did this thing individually in a little bit different way, but I was a little bit more on the strategy side. She was a little bit more on the pure creative. And then we partner perfectly. I mean, we get along exceptionally, but then, being able to work with someone who sees the world very similar as you do, and has integrity and believes what you believe. And we aren't the exact same human. We see things a little differently sometimes, but it's been so advantageous for us because we both value comedy, and we both value like empathy. And I think, again, those two things are so powerful and important when it comes to creating like powerful branding. So yeah, I know that's a kind of a meandering answer, but like that, I think that is those are kind of the two things that have like led me here, which has been really cool to see.
I love how you just mentioned that, there are certain things that sort of, knowingly or unknowingly influenced you into what is your career today. And I feel like sometimes when you look back and you just look at everything that you've been through, and that somehow led you here, that must be a very wonderful feeling, because a lot of people out there love what they do. But, to have it come from a source that you knew always existed within you, and, just to think that at that point you had no clue that, you would end up here. But now that you have, it's just really great to just, look back and just realize that, this is what it was all leading up to. So that was a wonderful feeling.
Yeah, it's funny because I felt very lost for a long time because I was in
Yeah, I can
like
imagine.
I was in careers that I never felt
Mm-hmm.
tapped into. Well, it tapped into like the way I like to think about things, like
Mm-hmm.
dissect things, like solve problems, but didn't allow that creative or humorous piece to come to the forefront.
Right.
And so I didn't know this world existed. I wasn't a marketing major. My career wasn't initially in marketing and branding. And so I think that, anyone out there who's maybe feeling a little lost or meandering, I do think there is something really powerful of like thinking about like about your kid personality, or like who you were before you grew up and started to think about who you should be, because
Right.
often those elements, if you can really cultivate them as an adult, like they can lead into something beautiful. Like I didn't know this career path existed, but yet these are the skill sets that I've always kind of had, but yet I didn't go into that because I didn't know that that was an opportunity for me. But like now I
Yeah.
think now that I'm in this world and I look back at my childhood, I go, oh yeah, this is the perfect path for me, So I think there's something really beautiful about that. I also, something I just will quickly share is I've spent a lot of time, as an agency, we've spent a lot of time about like redefining what success looks like for us. And at one point when we started Obedient, we thought success was building a huge agency and having multiple locations and a giant team. And now we're a small but mighty team. We have a lot of freedom and flexibility. We get to be very creative and play and laugh every day. And that is so much more important to me than like the perception of what
Mm-hmm.
success looks like. And once we kind of let go of that, it's allowed us to like embrace what we do, love what we do, not get caught up in what it should look like or like what you're kind of taught success looks like. And I
Right.
feel like a very successful person because I wake up every day and I love what I do and I love my team and I love my creative output. But it looks very differently. It looks very different than other agencies. And like, that's cool. That's okay. So, so I just wanted to share that too.
Yeah, there's a certain comfort in accepting that, things that look a certain way for somebody else might not be exactly what you want, but then at the end
Yeah.
of the day, you're just happy with how they work out, and you wouldn't ask for anything more. And I feel like that's a very, very wonderful feeling.
Ugh, yes,
Okay.
agree.
Moving on to the next question. This is a very interesting one. So I'm very interested to know what Allie's favorite example of great branding is.
Oh gosh, there's so many. It really, really depends, right? I'll tell you a few of my favorites.
Mm-hmm.
So one that I really like, and it's just pure fun and joy, is there's an ice cream brand called Halo Top, and they've done a really good job of having a very lighthearted, fun, playful personality. They do a really good job of adding personality to a lot of different elements of their product. And so like when you open the lid, there's like fun messaging on the top before you eat your ice cream. And so they're really good on social, and everything is, it's lighthearted, it's fun, it's playful. It's the way you think you should feel when you're eating ice cream. Like it's just joyful. And I think that there's something really beautiful about taking like a simple product and just simply making it more delightful. It's just surprising and it's delightful, and ice cream isn't complicated. And so they didn't complicate the branding around it. It's just pure fun. So I love that one. And it's also visually stunning. It's like playful and poppy and all that. Um, Aviation Gin is a gin brand. Ryan Reynolds is actually one of the owners of it, and he oversees a lot of the creative. And what they've done is they've taken this really traditional industry, gin, and gin has been, again, it's like been kind of the same for many, many years. Very traditional, not a lot of innovation happening in that category. But this gin brand was like a very high quality gin. And they have put out these really hilarious, funny ad videos, and they're hysterical. Like you'll laugh out loud watching them. They're very self-deprecating. They're very hyperbolic. They're very in on the joke. They're very tongue in cheek, and it's radically different than anything else you see in their industry. And so those, from a video content perspective, they have such great messaging, and it's delightful. I mean, I'm so jealous that I didn't create that. We actually interviewed the creative director, the brand director of Aviation Jet on our podcast, which was so fun to talk to them. And then the other one I think is really awesome is it's a little bit of a different tone. There's it's called Thanks. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the brand Thanks, but they've kind of created a couple different things. So two big things is like underwear for women who menstruate, and then they also have another line that's like incontinence products. So if you have like a leaky bladder, if you were previously pregnant, all that stuff. So what they've done is they've taken this topic that is often behind closed doors, and there's a lot of shame and embarrassment, and it's very taboo in a lot of ways still. And they have humanized it, and they've made it warm and approachable, and they've made it welcoming, and they've made it feel okay for people to talk about. So they used more of a direct, bold, no BS, but also very like empathetic tone of voice. And what that did is that, again, it allowed people to take this kind of cringy topic and it feel welcoming. And so those are just like three very different examples of brands that I love, because again, very different styles, very different approaches, but all course correcting a problem in their industry in a very cool way. So yeah, those are probably three that are like some of my faves right now.
So as soon as our conversation is over, I'll make it a point to go and check them out. And I'm sure that our viewers and listeners will be doing the same thing as soon as this interview is over.
Awesome.
Okay. And now with a very heavy heart, I'm coming to the last question.
Oh, okay. So, okay. Let's do it.
I am very thrilled to see the creativity that you exhibit. And very frankly speaking, it's important for us to safeguard our creative side when we get into an industry that demands us to probably balance out our analytical side as well. You know, like some time ago, we discussed that people think it's all about creativity, but at the same time, there's a lot that actually goes behind that. Balance these elements out. And what advice would you give to our similarly creative-minded folks?
Yeah, well, I think that's a really great question, especially because if you are, whether you're an entrepreneur or not, I often think you're doing a lot of different things in business. And so I know for me, like my brain, I would say is very divided between like analytical and creative. So I would not say I'm 100%, like I'm not the 100% creative person on the team. I'm like good at creative, but my brain also always thinks very analytically. Like I like problem solving. I like big picture stuff. I like audience response. Like I'm kind of thinking of all. I know for me, like I always tell Lindsay, like I have to spend, like when we're like mapping out our week in terms of what we have to do, I have to separate my days. So there are like days where I'm going to do more analysis, more technical things, more operational stuff, more some of that big picture planning. And like, I have to keep all of those on like a certain day, because it's hard for my brain to flip back and forth. Like there's times I've popped into let's do a creative brainstorm session. And I'm like, I can't get into it right now. Like my brain is fried because it's been in this other lane all day. And then there's days that like we have on what it's like, I don't know if you've seen the movie Mean Girls, but they say on Wednesdays on Wednesdays we wear pink.
We wear pink.
Yeah. So on our calendar on Wednesdays, it says on Wednesdays we do think, and that's our pure creative day. So on Wednesday we are ideating all of our creative projects. We're doing a lot of big client stuff. We do some stuff throughout the week as well, but like that's a day that's for pure creative. And so, we kind of have to keep it in silos sometimes. Now, Lindsay, on the other hand, her brain is kind of always in creative mode. So it's a lot harder for her to jump over to like the analytical piece. So like, we have to be mindful of what each other needs, or like other people on our team. But yeah, I try to keep it in different lanes. And also, I'm an extrovert. So I like talking with clients and people. And so I also have to make sure that's peppered throughout my week, because that's what gives me energy. So if I've had a week where I don't get to interact with clients or humans or do these fun interviews with people like you, I feel very depleted. Like I like to do this stuff. I love talking with individuals. I love getting to know people and having conversations. And so that's another part that I always make sure that's in place to make sure I feel fueled. Because that's really like, that's what fills my cup, and that's what allows me to be both analytical and creative. So like, it's really, for me, comes down to like the human connection. So that's another important piece. So yeah, I guess my advice would be that like honor the way your brain works and give yourself time to like dedicate. I mean, you might not be able to do it perfectly, but like really carve out some time to dedicate, you know,
Right.
when your brain has to think in one direction and then allow your brain to think in another direction, because it is so hard to flip flop a lot of
Yes,
times.
absolutely. And I feel like a lot of people, especially to speak very frankly, a lot of people that are creative, by
Yeah.
nature, by their basic nature itself, it's very easy for them to think of it as a very daunting task to decide what they want to do in the future. Because at one point, there's a very fair chance that, they begin to question how they can apply their creativity and also, earn some money through that. So I feel like the answer that you just gave, if there are any viewers out there or if there are any listeners who are probably going through something like this right now, when they listen to you, I'm sure that this is just going to remain a solved doubt, because everything that you said is literally so inspiring. And I'm so, so glad that you joined us here today, Ali. It was absolutely great talking to you. And to tell you on a very personal note, I grew up reading BuzzFeed, and getting to speak to someone who has written for BuzzFeed is an absolute pleasure. So I really want to thank you for your insight. I want to thank you for your time, and I will personally view this conversation as a learning experience. And I'm sure it's safe to say that so will everybody else. Thank you so
Well,
much for joining us here today.
thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here and such a joy to chat with you. And yeah, I just encourage everyone, embrace that creative part of yourself. You will find your lane, and just be true to who you are, your integrity, what you believe in, and like add more joy to the world. Like we all need it. So yeah, thank you so much for having me. You are a doll.
Thank you so much, Ali.
Thank you.